Welcome, everybody. My name is Deirdre Karen, and I am so excited to have Dr. Raj Ramesh. I've been looking at your doodles for many years now, looking at what you're doing with AI, looking at your architecture. So I think you bring a huge value to the community and really appreciate all the work that you've done. So who will be in the room today? So we've got lovely Omar Gawad. He is the one that comes up with these amazing questions that we have for our guest speakers every single time, very specific to the industry and so forth. He's also a strategist, an architect, an analyst who's got many skills. He also runs a YouTube channel. And then we've got Alain, our fantastic programmer. He is the chief architect, CTO at Aiden, and really amazing architect as well as programmer, engineer, you name it. So he brings a lot of depth to the interviews and the conversation. So he's also the owner of Iris Business Architect. A little bit about me. My name is Deirdre Karen, and I run two companies. I have Agora Insights, where I train business architects and business analysts to get certified and various other things. And I'm also the co-owner and CEO of Aiden, and so that's eventuated in working very closely with Alain. Let's talk about Raj. So our guest speaker today. So Dr. Raj Ramesh, who has a PhD in artificial intelligence. Congratulations on that. That's wonderful. I know that takes a lot of time to get done. Raj is a seasoned professional speaker, and for those who've seen his doodles, he's got a wonderful YouTube site, often recommended to many of our learners to have a look at those, actually. He has experience in AI, machine learning, and data strategy, having successfully led over 100 projects in the Fortune 50 companies. He specializes in aligning data strategies with data processes to drive digital transformation. He's passionate about simplifying complexity and empowers organizations to enhance customer experience and achieve their strategic goals. Of course, you can connect with him on YouTube and LinkedIn, which I think is the best place, Raj?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, awesome. Without further delay, I'll hand over to you, Omar, to get the session going.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, and thank you, Dr. Raj, for it's really a pleasure to have you on this series, and welcome everyone to today's session. Let's open our conversation with something that Dr. Raj is incredibly well known for, which is making the most complex topics seem very simple and very understandable through using great visuals and storytelling techniques and doodles that Deirdre discussed. And by the way, I'm one of the big fans for your technique, to be honest. As Dr. Raj, one of the biggest challenges with utilizing AI in business isn't just the technology. It's the complexity that comes with it. Leaders nowadays often don't know where to start. The teams are struggling to connect AI to the business value and how they include AI within their work. And also many strategies get lost in the transformation within the organization. So through your visual storytelling, would you like to break down this complexity into something actionable and relatable? How can organization crack this complexity of AI and move from the abstract conversations to clear and actionable structures?
Sure. First, thank you, Omar and Deirdre and Alain and others that have invited me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about sharing some of my thoughts. I love doodles, and I love to present information in a visual fashion because what it does in my mind, I think, is simplifies the complexity. And when you look at AI and you try to, as a discipline, and when we try to roll AI into an organization, it's just not the technology that is sufficient. So it's not enough if we have data scientists or AI engineers to come and implement the solution. What we have is much more complicated. We have process changes, mindset changes, change management, and a whole slew of other things. So this is a multidimensional problem that we're looking at. And if you're looking at a multidimensional problem, how do you actually communicate this in a very easy to understand way? That is a challenge. And if we try to, in my experience, if we try to communicate it linearly, then that's a problem because a lot of people do not know what part they have to play a role in. If we communicate in an abstract way, then people get lost totally. I remember I have three kids, they're in college or just graduated, 3 boys. One of them was in high school, and then I went to him and I said, hey, you better get good grades. And after a while, I told him like 6 times. After a while, he rolled his eyes and he said, yeah, Dad, this is obvious. Tell me something that's tangible. What can I do? Getting good grades is everybody knows that I got to get good grades, right? So you got to tell people something tangible. Same thing happens with leaders today. Leaders today might say, hey, we got to use Gen AI, or we got to use AI, but they don't tell their people how to use it or what is it that they got to use. So people get lost. I think by virtue of using visual methods to communicate, we are forced to actually make it tangible. You can't, unless you're Picasso, right? You can't really put intangibles or abstract concepts on a piece of paper and try to explain it, because you're forced to now make it much more tangible. That's where I think the power of visuals is. And enterprise architects, I think in this, they play a huge role because they're the ones who understand these visuals, the maps and the capability maps and the process maps and all those stuff. And they can actually translate those visuals into something more tangible when we try to execute on an AI plan to roll out AI into the organization.
Do you mind maybe just elaborating a little bit on what you meant around the architecture?
Yeah. As architects, we're familiar with visuals. We always go to the whiteboard and draw things. A perfect analogy or example would be a map. This is not what an architect does, but if we take a map as a visual communication tool, and for example, let's say I want to go from Washington, D.C. to San Jose. If I look at a map, I can clearly understand what route I should take. And what happens is that if I were to convert, imagine that I didn't have a map and I wanted to convert this to a PowerPoint deck. Now, if I want to take the information that's in a map and convert it into a PowerPoint deck, that'll probably run into 16,000 pages. And nobody would understand what it communicates. And you would never be able to go from Washington to San Jose. Of course, different people will require different maps, but the concept of the map is the same. If I wanted to fly to New Zealand, I would use a world map, whereas if I want to go to Chicago, I'll use a local Illinois map. And that's the only difference. But understanding and interpreting that is almost common knowledge now. But we do have visuals in the enterprise architecture domain or architecture domain that not everybody reads and understands. For example, maps, 95% of the population can read a map, but EA visuals are difficult to read. So it is up to us then to capture the problem, capture the visuals, and then explain it to our audiences to say, hey, this is a capability map and this is what it does. I have artificial intelligence and this capability and this capability. Should we have more? Should we have less? Should we prioritize? Here's my process map. This is what the process does. Here's where I have automation. Here's where I don't. And these are the kinds of conversations then you can start having, instead of saying, let me give you a document, let me give you a PowerPoint, walk you through bullet points. It doesn't make the context. The topic of this session is context, and people lose context. Context is one of the most important things, and EAs and architects and analysts are probably in the best position to understand the context and deliver to them.
Dr. Raj, you mentioned at the very beginning that AI is much more than technology, and it's all the buzz right now. And many companies that are just getting their feet wet with AI will look at different experiments or different little tools here and there. So they're just trying to see what they can do. But ultimately, what should be their approach of a much broadened AI strategy? How to get over the experimentation phase and really get into a more production phase, if I can use that terminology.
Sure. I think you're asking, for example, how do you integrate the AI into your business strategy in some sense to be able to effective...
As you mentioned, processes and other pieces.
Yeah, sure. So let's look at the current state of how AI is being rolled out in many organizations. People will say, oh, there's a chatbot. Let's put that into our organization. Somebody will say, hey, we can do predictive analysis. Some functional area will then start doing predictive analysis. Some others will do identification through maybe computer vision systems. So they're all working in silos, right? And they're doing it because that's what they get their hands on. And perhaps there's no overarching strategy around AI. But if we technically look at it in a much more systematic way, like an architect would say, what is your business strategy? But first, let's get clear on strategy versus goal. So the business goal might be to say we need to increase our market share. That's a business goal. Now, to accomplish this goal, you might have different strategies. The Leadership might decide we got to find new markets. Maybe we got to sell in Australia and New Zealand and those places, the new markets, right? The other option might be to say we might upsell our customers, existing customers. That's a different option. A third option might be to say we don't have enough products. Let's create new products and sell them, right? In each of these options, the way you use AI would be slightly different. Because in the first option, where you are looking for new markets, you could use AI for demographic analysis, figuring out where do you want to sell. You want to sell it in Africa or you want to sell it in Europe or Australia, right? Those are decisions that you would make, but you can use AI to make those decisions. And then you could use NLP, for example, or natural language processing or translation to create content for those markets that you're selling to. Or you could use image generation tools to create images that are localized. That's one option. If you take the next option and you say, I'm interested in our strategy is actually doing upsell, then you're not going to focus on those AI tools, or you'll still focus on the tools, but you won't focus on those aspects of AI. You'd say, how do I analyze my customers and then do an upsell for them? So that means I got to do customer analysis and who has an inclination to buy my next product. And I can do those kinds of things. That means I'm focusing more on my customer database, CRM, chatbots. Maybe I have a conversation with customers to figure out what their needs and wants are. And if you choose a different option, which is let's increase our product suite, that would say, let's use AI for simulation. Let's use AI for coming up with new products. Which ones, what are our gaps in the current product set? What should we use how do we now fill that gap with AI being that new tool? And maybe it can help us get to new products or new variations that we can sell to. So I think overall, you have intent as to why you're using AI the way you are, because then it aligns with the business strategy. If it doesn't, then it's just a random set of tools that you're using.
So you think it's possible to get an overarching strategy or the Rosetta Stone of AI, or it's going to be like an application landscape that's pretty scattered?
That's the danger, right? Will we learn our lessons? I'm not sure. Some organizations will learn their lessons and look at their applications, and some organizations I work with have 1,200 applications, and they're all not integrated. They're just siloed applications. And we're spending a lot of time trying to integrate them. But if an organization now is ready to take on that, AI strategy is a very loose term and it can be interpreted many ways. But if you have intent around why are you bringing the AI in the way you are, then I think they will get a little bit ahead of the other organizations that are not going to do that. And therefore, if they start doing AI with intent, then they might have, and they should have a competitive advantage pretty quickly. And you might have the same tools. Like you and I probably have access to the same tools, but how we use it is going to be the differentiator, right? Most companies will have access to the same tools. There are a few that have their own, like the Googles and so on, but most companies will have access to the same set of tools. Question is, how are you going to use it?
Thank you.
Great question and great response. So let's look at the execution though. Right. So let's assume we have this great strategy and we're looking at how we're going to integrate all of these things. But even with a clear strategy, businesses often fail to execute. We know how projects just don't always work out exactly like we planned initially, and they lose momentum and so forth. So let's discuss as architects how we could play a role in making strategy real and scalable. What are your thoughts around that?
Sure. This is an awesome question, and I think it's relevant to us, right? Because we've been architects for a long time. I would start with perhaps an example of a car. Let's take a car. Somebody created and designed the car, but a car does not exist in isolation. You have to have the roads. When we go from point A to point B, like I said earlier, if I were to drive from Washington to San Jose, I'm going to have to stop in the middle, gas stations in the middle. I'm going to have food. I'm going to have to stay at hotels and so on and so forth. So it is not enough if you just had the car. There is so much around the car that is required. The same thing with AI. I believe that AI by itself, the technology is great and it's advanced us far, But AI, if you were to drop AI into an organization, that itself is not going to give you value. What gives you value or what gives us value is everything surrounding it, like the processes that have to change, the people's mindset that has to change, and so on and so forth. In fact, I think in my mind, there's a very small set of people who need to be AI experts. There's a much larger set of people who need to understand the global context around where AI is placed. For a similar situation with cars, you and I'm assuming, I don't know how a car works to the details. Maybe you do, but some of us, not everybody understands how the car works to details, right? And if you look at the number of car engineers who design cars, they're probably a fraction of the people who use cars. We will be in a situation where very few people need to understand the internal workings of deep learning and neural networks and how a convolution neural network works and so on and so forth. But around it is what we have to think about. We need to understand the functionality of what AI can do. So we need to be able to talk to what a chatbot does versus what a computer vision system can do. But that's all we need to know as architects. We need to then figure out how we can fit that into the organization. But I think there's this fear factor, and I don't know if I'm biased, but if I look at the internet and LinkedIn and courses, there are so many AI courses people are offering, but in my mind, most people don't have to take those AI courses. You don't need to understand the internal stuff. But then there's a scare tactic of, oh, you got to learn this and you got to learn this, because you could spend a lifetime just learning the technology. It's like you could spend a lifetime learning how the car works, but not even drive it. But the whole point is we need to get to drive it, right? And we are the architects who help them to say, hey, you need a road, better build one. You need a hotel because people are going to travel. People are going to stay. You need food. You need this. You need that. And so we need to build that ecosystem. And we need to tell the story around building that ecosystem for the business to say, hey, you can't just roll out AI. It's not going to work. You got to do all these other things. And which we already know, right? Which we already are experts at. Many of us have done change management, process optimization, capability optimization, and so on and so forth.
That's awesome.
So,
thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, great response. Thank you, Dr. Raj, and thank you, Didri, for the question. I want to build up on this part, Dr. Raj, as we discussed what holds the AI transformation from getting to the light. And you mentioned some human and organizational barriers like people, mindset, resistance, sometimes even confusion, and so on and so forth. From your perspective, how can leaders address those barriers, whether the human or organizational barriers, from the beginning before starting the AI transformation?
Sure. Yeah, as soon as you mention AI, I think 90% of the people are like, oh, it's going to take my job away. That is the biggest fear. Now, you will have different schools of thoughts on that. Some and big and top leaders, CEOs talking about this as well, saying, yep, it'll take away all the jobs. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people who say, no, it's going to supplement or complement our jobs and so on. Interestingly, I just created a YouTube video on this topic, I think maybe a month back, because I wanted to know the basis on which these people are making decisions. How can you so confidently say that AI is going to take your job? Or how can you so confidently say this or that? And one of the things that today's AI does is we capture the structure of the human brain into an AI. So it is fundamentally the neural network, that's the brain structure with the nerves and the synapses that is modeled in the computer for most part, including Gen AI, which is just a variation of that. What we have not captured so far is we haven't captured the chemical components of the human brain. So in the human brain, we have a lot of hormones and chemicals that work together in different ways to deliver what makes us human. And we haven't really figured that out. So that's why when we talk about human emotion or human connection, these are things that are abstract, but it's hard to codify in a computer. And we haven't done that yet, and which is why today's AI lacks these kinds of emotions. They may artificially seem like they understand you. And when you talk to some of these AI systems, it looks like they understand us. There are psychologists AI or psychiatrists AI that can talk to you, but really they have no feelings, right? We know this for a fact. People, when they make predictions, are not making it based on anything. They're just making it on projecting on today's advances. They're just projecting it forward, which may or may not come true. That's like saying, I talk about this in my video a little bit, that's like saying if you take today's cars, that are much faster than humans in running. And then if I were to extrapolate that somehow, I could get a car that climbs mountains, that can trek Mount Everest with me, that can go down deep in the into the Grand Canyon. This is not true. You can't just take today's technology, project it out, and go that way. So I think there's a lot of fear mongering that's going on. That's one of the biggest barriers. So let's be clear on that one. But having said that, AI does help, and there are some jobs and some roles that might be outdated, because we've seen this throughout history. We've seen that there is no more like elevator person who punches the buttons. You come in and you punch the elevator. There are no more horse carriage, I think they call coachmen. These are out. So if you were a horse carriage coachman, you would be looking for another job, or you would try to transform yourself. So that's going to be there. And we humans, we need to take our own responsibility to do that. So that's a barrier. Another barrier might be the adoption of AI within the organization. So leaders, for example, will say that, yeah, your job is not going to be outsourced. Or your job is not going to be taken by AI. We'll give you a better job. You'll do this kind of stuff and that kind of stuff. You'll do more higher level stuff. But we also have to participate in getting to that high level stuff and figuring out what is that high level stuff that I'm moving to. And therefore, I need to be upskilled on that. And therefore, I need to ask my leader to help me upskill on that so that I can get to that role. So the leader's responsibility might be then to create an environment where people can experiment and have the confidence, but also be able to move into an environment where they can play a much more enhanced role. And they ought to create that environment or help create that environment for them. That's another barrier that the leader is responsible for setting up. In the first case, when I said AI is taking away our jobs, it's my own responsibility to make sure I'm prepared. The second case, the leader has to be responsible to prepare the environment. And maybe there's one more barrier, which I often see, which is organizations are slow in adopting AI, whereas the actual employees are like far ahead. They experiment with ChatGPT at home. They take Copilot or different variation code generation tools and do coding on their own. But the organization is still figuring out, should we have a chief AI officer? Should we have a centralized system? They're just figuring out the organizational structure, whereas their people are far ahead. So that's another barrier. So the leaders better get up in front of the line rather than being laggard.
Yeah.
So Raj, talking about those leaders and really how they can keep up even with their own people and support them correctly, as you were alluding to, because there's a lot of buzz and there's a big gap between reality and hype, and you have to find your way into that. What would be the way for those leaders to get up to speed and move from the AI buzzword and telling people they won't be outsourced or whatever, and clearly know that what they're saying is correct? So to bring them strategic clarity, even if maybe they don't have the time to play with it enough and they're behind the curve.
Yeah, that's a very good question as well. Today, so here's what the typical leader's day looks like, right? They're working with AI, they go talk to an analyst. This analyst says, oh, you got to put AI in, and AI is the thing. They come back to the organization and say, we got to use AI. We got to use AI. Nobody knows how. Yeah, we got to use it.
Because ultimately, leader wants one of two things: either save money or make money.
Yeah,
it all boils down to one of those two things.
It boils down to that, but they're also without thinking about the holistic strategy. In one case, they want to save money. Yep, they do this. And then in another case, they want to meet customer expectations or better serve the customer. They'll put a chatbot in, and so on. So it's almost like scrambling to use AI. If they instead reverse their thinking and say, forget about just bringing the tool in and just rolling it out, let's talk about what business problems we need to solve. Am I having a problem with customer interaction? Yes, no. Am I having a problem with cost leakage in my supply chain? Am I having a problem here? And so on. So they can identify different problems, right? Which they should be able to, independent of AI. Now, AI is a tool that can be used in context of each of these areas. But this is where an enterprise architect could come in and say, hey, leader, you got this capability map. Here are your capabilities. Among these capabilities, these 5 capabilities provide you the competitive advantage that you need. So if you were to throw AI into the system, into these, better throw them into the 5 of them first, instead of something that doesn't matter to you. So at least we have enterprise architects giving them a guided way to say, hey, let's use AI to solve the business problem and not necessarily the other way around. Let's not just throw AI into our system and say, yeah, do this. Then we'll end up with a bunch of AI that may or may not be connected underlying and underneath with maybe the data is shared, maybe the data is not shared. This is a common problem. For example, marketing may start with an AI. They want to predict or they want to send out their campaigns. They might use AI to optimize their campaigns. On the other hand, you might have a sales organization or maybe whoever's in charge of customer acquisitions doing their customer analysis on their CRM. And then here you have disconnected implementations of AI. This AI might be sending out campaigns to people who these guys figured out not going to buy. So if you have this disconnect, you have AI. So independently, these guys can claim that, yes, we have AI, and these guys can say, yes, we have AI, but together it doesn't make sense.
And even tune differently to produce different results or even competing results.
Exactly. So the point is AI by itself is not going to now figure out how this and this are integrated. And so that's left to people like architects who have to look holistically and say, by the way, you're doing this and these are in conflict, or you're putting AI into a use case that nobody's really going to care about, or our organization does not have a competitive advantage. If you had that same money and resources, you might as well throw it in here instead of this, and so on. So what we do is, as enterprise architects, we need to understand the technology aspects of AI as being a tool, and it does provide a lot of value, but we also understand the business and say, hey, this is the competitive advantage capability, this is a high priority capability, this capability we can't outsource, we need to keep it in-house for whatever reason, and so on. So we can understand the landscape of enterprise architects, understand that landscape. They go to the business leader and say, yeah, you went to a conference, you found out that you could use Cursor AI for coding. Our coding is not done internally. We're outsourcing our coding, and so on. Right? You can identify conflicts right off the bat. So I think to swing back to your answer, what do leaders have to do? I think they might have to, instead of talking these buzzwords, they actually have to think through the second level of what are we trying to do, and not just throw it out at, let's start a group here and do experimental AI. People start Gen AI groups. And this is happening in today's industries. They say, okay, Gen AI generative AI is becoming a big deal. Let's start a group who focuses on Gen AI. That may or may not be right, because Gen AI is only one small portion of the AI landscape. And the AI landscape is only one small portion of the enterprise architecture landscape, which means that you can't just, it's like coming in and saying, for a car, the example that I said, let's start a engine group that makes and focuses on engine. We'll figure out how to use it later. So there is some disconnect there, and people have to take a holistic look, and they have to seek advice from others who know how to take a holistic look.
Yeah, and forget about the brake group. We'll figure that out once we
That's right.
100 miles an hour.
And then after rolling everything out, we'll figure, and then the enterprise architect might come and say, by the way, did you know that your car has no brakes? And then we'll go back to the drawing board and say, oh, we missed that.
So my next question for you, Raj, is, so when we look at your doodles, one of my favorite doodles of yours is the one where you talk about the blue and red ocean.
Yeah.
I really like that one. And the reason why I like it, so I'm leaving it a little bit away from the question, is a lot of people don't fully understand that the change here is quite big. It can be quite profound. So in your blue ocean strategy, you talk about how you can rethink how your entire organization works. And also if you're a startup, it's like that Uber moment where you can rethink, or the Kodak moment where you can rethink the entire operating model and how things are working. So my question is, when we look at, let's say, our different approaches and our strategies and so forth, how do we decide as a business? Because not all businesses can do such a dramatic change. Some of them, like governments, for instance, are not going to embrace a fully automated kind of system with human in the loop. But how do we think about that from the beginning? Because that is not something people generally think about. As we've spoken, we look at specific things, like we'll say Gen AI and we want to do a chatbot, that kind of thing. But how do we need to think, and how do we action that moving forward with the business, no matter what scale, where they are in this kind of strategy that they're looking at?
Thank you. Appreciate it. So let's just get to what blue ocean and red ocean is for those who haven't seen that. And this is not my concept. This concept has been around in management for a few years now. I think Renee and Dr. Sang, or I'm not sure of who the author is, but the concept is that in red ocean is you have a lot of companies competing for the same customers in the same environment. So what they compete on, and perhaps they compete on prices and they compete on other things, but they're all in an established industry. And then you have the blue ocean, which is totally open space. Nobody is there. If you establish a company there, you probably have you are the first, you could be the first or the second, and you could have much more room to play. So you're not competing against all others. So here the red is because the sharks are eating each other and there's a lot of blood, which is why it's red. Blue is clear, right? If you take a company that already is well established, maybe an incumbent or a legacy company has been around for 50, 100 years, they have their model, they have their operating model, they have their capabilities, and they're doing pretty well in those capabilities. You wouldn't expect them to suddenly switch to a blue ocean, meaning, well, let's throw everything away and start something else. If I have a restaurant in Chicago or in Bloomington where I live, and I have a 5-star Michelin star restaurant, I'm not going to say, hey, nobody's serving Korean food in my community, and maybe that's a blue ocean because nobody else is meeting that need. Let me just quit everything I do and jump into Korean food and serve Korean food. It may or may not work because you have established things and you don't know what that market is and so on and so forth. So I'm not saying that we should all jump into the blue ocean or all companies should jump into the blue ocean. So there are a set of companies like what you mentioned, like governments and so on, that will stay in that red ocean, but the government has no competition. But so they're probably in a separate ocean by themselves. But you get the point, right? But they would say, let's now figure out, now we have this AI thing in. Let's now figure out how we can use AI in our ocean. Let's say they're fishing. They used to use fishing poles. Now the AI is like that fishing net. Okay, now we got a net. Now we can catch more fish. Maybe we should use that we'll still stick to fishing. We're not going into tourism. We'll still stick to fishing, but we'll use AI properly. So those cases, they have to then identify use cases to say, which capabilities do I actually improve? What is my business value? How am I going to get return on it, and so on? Now, they might step into the blue ocean to say, by the way, as we did our exploration, we figured out that one product is lacking. The customer would really like this product, or they're asking for it, and every time they ask for it, we're sending them to our competitor down the street because they're the ones who have that product and so on. We should probably create that, and then we can get into a little bit of a blue ocean concept. So tippy toe into it. Whereas now you have a blue ocean. If I were a startup, I would almost not look at the red ocean. I would say, now I have at my disposal here the technologies that will allow me to do entirely different things. And let me think of a market which is not well served and come up with it. So looking back, you could say Uber did something like that, Uber and other car riding apps. They said, we got the internet, we got phones, and we should now be able to communicate with people on phones who need a ride. If people didn't have the phones, they would not be in a position to establish that business model. So if we future project that and say, what is it that we can do now because we have AI and because there's a need, then companies can say, this is what I can do. This is something entirely new I could do. Down the street here, I shouldn't say down the street, but close by, we have John Deere headquartered. And John Deere is in the agriculture business. They make equipments for agriculture. So one of the uses of AI that they use AI for is they have these sprays that can now individually kill plants that are like herbicide that could kill specific plants, or what do you call those?
Weeds.
Weeds, yeah, it just slipped my tongue. So you could kill weeds in a very focused way. And they're using computer vision to recognize what the weed is and so on and optimize it. Now, you could say, I have that technology. Now I could add on to that and say, if I'm helping the farmer save on cost optimize, what else can I do? And they could probably say, the farmers sell their produce at the market, but they don't know the market prices. Now we, meaning John Deere, has access to the market prices. They're a much bigger company. Maybe they can say, hey, we can collaborate and we can project the prices of the market using AI and we can feed it to you, the farmer, and you could take advantage of that. Now that would be a new business that nobody else has done. And they're in a very good position to be able to do that because they already have a relationship with the farmer and so on. In that case, we can't just say do or don't look at blue ocean and red ocean. Yes, now we know that the concept of blue ocean exists. Perhaps now we know that AI exists and we have all these technologies around AI. Let's be innovative and figure out where there is a gap, where there's a market need, and what we can do to fill that gap using our capabilities.
Yeah, it is awesome, to be honest. The blue ocean and red ocean, it is one of the most, let's say, powerful concepts that every business should consider. And I would like to relate this blue ocean and red ocean to my question and also elaborate more on one of the fears that you discussed before regarding the fear of losing the jobs. We discussed that many employees worry about that they might be replaced by AI, but as that shift comes with both uncertainty and opportunity as well.
Yeah.
From your perspective and elaborating to the blue ocean and red ocean, how can professionals, whether from a technical or non-technical background, reframe their roles to stay relevant and competent within the AI is becoming to be embedded into the way they work and how they work every day?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question because we know that AI is coming, right? There is no doubt about it. And we know that environments are going to change. So we know that we have to adapt. So that mindset we all have to be prepared for. If we dig a hole and put our heads in the sand, that is an unfortunate situation. So let's look at technology. Technologists typically are fast changers because every day a new technology rolls out. They got to learn a new programming language and learn a new database, learn a new environment like from on-prem to cloud, and they keep learning. So in some sense, it's a little more natural for them to be learning. However, their environment is also changing pretty fast. Now, some people have projected that, some leaders have projected that coding is going to be outdated and nobody needs to code, whereas some don't agree to that school. Nobody really knows the real right answer, but the only thing we know is we got to have these people move and learn new things. In coding, for example, if I am a coder, I've been a coder before, so I can speak to this. If I'm a coder, I don't need to now sit and analyze 2 days of syntax and correct errors that will take time for me to fix and fix the logic and so on. Now I have AI that can help me code faster. But then by virtue of coding faster, where I'm moving is instead of focusing too much on the code itself, what I'm focusing on or should be focusing on is the outcome that delivers. So I'm more focused on the experience that this can deliver to the customer. So I'm moving in some sense from understanding my environment, technology environment or technical environment, into a little more of a customer-centric environment. What is it that I'm doing that will help the customer to be more happier, satisfied, and so on? And I as a coder and I as a technologist, am in a unique position to do this because I understand AI, I understand how AI works, I understand the data it's using, I understand that sometimes if you use the wrong data, it's going to give you wrong results. All this I understand as a technical person. So therefore I can move to a place where I'm using this with much more leverage, if you will, and actually delivering value to customers or delivering value to the business indirectly. So that's one part. The non-technical part, many enterprise architects also, they came from different areas. They don't necessarily have that deep technology experience, and that's okay. Because as I said, the car is a small portion of the big box. There's so much out there that needs to be done, right? So if we can focus on that outer box to say, what are the skills that I need to develop to be able to now make that outer box outside of the AI box better? I could I could help change processes. Instead of becoming a process optimizer, for example, I could talk to AI and I could figure out what functionality AI offers so that I can completely revamp this process, so the way we do things. I could now focus more on the non-tangible aspects of delivering customer value. So when we talk about delivering customer value, we talk about technical solutions like a chatbot will be able to answer the question. Fine. We already have the data. It's just going to take that data and format it through an LLM that gives you an answer that the customer can understand. But who's understanding the emotion of the customer? Who's understanding the context of the customer? Who's understanding all those pieces that are not really captured in any of the systems, the non-tangible aspects of the business? And it's not only customer. There are so many non-tangible aspects of the business. There's politics in the business. There is leaders communicating with each other and they come up with these ideas, but there is an underlying, between the lines kind of things that have to be read and interpreted. You can't just put an AI system there and say, listen to the conversation and tell me what's going on. It'll tell you what's going on superficially, but not what's going on between the lines. So there is a lot of flux, I would say, that we haven't really captured as business architects. Sometimes we just ignore that or we don't capture that. But then this is a whole new space that we got to figure out how to enhance our own skills and capture and use that. And sometimes we may not be able to capture that, but we have to react to that and make sure that we work with the different leaders who may have different perspectives and come from different areas to say, here's what I bring to the table. I bring to the table something that AI cannot bring, something technology that cannot bring, but I am able to deliver the business value outside the box of the AI, outside the AI circle. I draw a circle and call it box. But here's the AI circle and here's the box around it, and here's where I can add value, right? So this goes back to will AI take my job? Technical parts, yes, mostly, because now data is automated and everything, but there are some jobs it won't be able to take, like which data do I feed the AI to learn? If I feed the wrong data, you're going to get a wrong AI system that hallucinates or doesn't give, or is totally wrong. So I, as an architect, have to figure out, is this the right data to feed? Are we training our employees in a way to use to actually flourish in a post-AI world? I shouldn't say post-AI because advancement in AI is not going to stop. In a post-AI implementation world, I should say, maybe. It's a continuous process. So to make it simple, I think there is a lot to be explored and so many variations that one has to think about their own environment, and especially either a technology or a non-technical person, think about their own environment. Think about what are the possibilities that AI brings. Think of it as an opportunity. And have the mindset to change, because the only major problem is if you don't change, then you'll be outdated. But if you do change, as long as you can navigate that change a little bit, you try this, you try that, you try this, you try that, and position yourself in a unique position, you're good. That's what I would think is. Sorry for a long-winded answer. Hopefully you had that.
No, not at all. I enjoyed your answer. Thank you so much, Dr. Raj.
Sure.
Earlier, we talked about how organization can move from tools and experiment to more strategic implementation of AI. Would you have any real-world example of companies that have gone much further and that you could share some of what made those transformations successful?
Sure. Maybe I should bring the red ocean, blue ocean strategy that we talked about, the discussion that we talked about. It'd be helpful to put that in context. So we all know Amazon. We've all used Amazon, hopefully, that we know that it makes recommendations on products. If I buy soap, it'll make a recommendation on a soap dish that a lot of people bought this, and it'll make that recommendation. So it's long in that sense. Netflix recommends movies. So the recommendation engine has been around for a long time. So these engines are actually based on machine learning principles and AI underneath the hood. We just didn't talk about these as AI, but there's a concept called collaborative filtering, which basically looks at you and it says, you are the person who bought these products. Let me look at other people who bought these products, and then let me look at the product. I, as a product, was bought by Alain. I, as a product, was bought by somebody else. And so I can make that combination and figure out who's going to buy what. So these established companies, like John Deere is also an established company, and it's going into AI for farming, optimizing AI for farming. So they're still in the red ocean, but they're now exploring different aspects where they can now use AI to make each of their processes much better, 10 times better probably. And therefore, by virtue of making it better, they're now selling it to new customers or creating better customer value or more customer value. On the other end of the spectrum, when we talk about new entrants to this whole space, and every time we hear a number, and after a while, these numbers fly over my head. Yeah, and 2025 is going to be like 50 billion or 50 trillion in investment. It's not trillion, but in the order of, so 250 billion is going to go into AI investments, AI startups. So these startups essentially start with a clean slate, and they could say, nobody's in this space. I'm going to now start a new model that will most likely click. And each one is hoping for that. 1,000 companies are started in that domain. For example, I use YouTube videos. If there is a company that basically said or says, I think it's called Linguana. I don't use them, but just an example, that they could take any video and translate it into another language to be automatically put in a foreign environment, right? In Tanzania, or with their local language, localization and everything. So this is a market that did not exist before the AI came into play. So for them to have to do this, they needed YouTube to exist. They needed now AI translators to exist, and they can combine the two and say, hey, we can take your YouTube video, combine it with translation, put it out there. You can make more money because of that. So what I'm saying is that there are these new tools and technologies that we can start using that come into play in addressing that space as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, pretty much. Thank you very much.
So you have quite a unique skill, Raj, of being able to visualize things simply and using doodles. I'm curious to know, by the way, you've been doing it for at least 10 years. What inspires you to use that method?
Yeah, the history behind that is that I consulted with leaders a lot, and typically my mode of consultation would be that I would just sit across the table with a leader and have a discussion. I have mentally prepared something, but I haven't really put it on paper. I don't go with a PowerPoint. And then we'll sit across and talk, and then I'll start drawing these pictures. And then eventually what some of them would do is they'll pull the paper away from me and they'll draw stuff. And then they'll give it back. And so what it ended up being is like almost a shared creation. At the end of the conversation, they'll say, oh, that looks exactly like what I wanted. Can I have that piece of paper? So they'll take the paper away. And when I go and talk about the same topic to another leader, I can't start with that paper. I just need to start from scratch, because then I take them along on that journey. And then I figured, this is not scalable. What am I going to do to scale this? And that's when I started experimenting with YouTube as an option. And what it does in my mind is it creates a mental model, a shared mental model, which is very useful. This reminds me of my undergrad, in my grad school. I used to say, before I got married, and I'm happily married with a very supporting wife who withstands my all deviations and all that stuff. But before I got married, I used to live in this graduate complex, which is a multi-story building. And then I lived on maybe the top 2 floors from the top or something like that. And then there was this young, attractive woman who lived maybe 1 or 2 floors above me. And then she used to come on the elevator sometimes, and we just meet each other and smile. And I was infatuated with her, but I never talked. And so I was hoping that maybe one day we'll go out on a date or something like that. And then one day we happened to be in the elevator, and she said, do you have the time? And I had just come from India about 6 months back, and the expression, do you have the time, is not very common. It's like more like, what time is it, is how people ask. But when she said, do you have the time, I'm thinking that she wants to go out on a date, and she says, oh, do you want to, so do you have the time? I'm thinking, for what? And I'm saying, yeah, sure, I have the time. And then I keep still, I'm waiting. And then she's waiting and I'm waiting. And then she finally says, what would it be? So she's thinking time, I'm thinking date, and our mental models are messed up. So in response to her question, what would it be? I'm saying, whatever you want it to be, right? True incident. And then we are on totally 2 different mental models. Well, of course, that was the last time she spoke to me. But the thing is, we are communicating on two different planes. We don't understand each other because we had assumptions that we were entirely different. So the power of the visual, I think, is it brings us to a common mental model so that now you and I can communicate and we can understand what it is, the map that we drew on the picture. We can say, this is the map. You and I agree. We collaboratively created this, and therefore you understand it as exactly like I understood it, and therefore there's no confusion.
That's a great example.
Yeah, we don't have the same thing with PowerPoint, with documents. We don't have the same effect. And interestingly, I try to use the A/B testing, and I create visuals. When I create visuals with just stock images and stock photos and with the same messaging, with the same lines, I'll create a message with stock photos and stock videos, and I'll create a doodle. People will prefer the doodle much more than they prefer the stock videos, even though you think that the stock video is much more professionally done. Here I am just sketching on a napkin with a face, human faces. Nothing looks like a human face. It looks like a orange with two dots. But they relate to that much more than they relate to the other one. And so I figured the power of visual communication in the way that I have done it, and I'm sure there are many ways to communicate visually, but I feel that my way has stood the test of time. As you said, I started 10 years ago. I still do it as a hobby, and it is very effective. And especially as we move into a more complex world with AI and all that, we architects and analysts, we have to move to a visual medium where we can co-create and help understand, because ultimately the power is in communicating. It's not necessarily the jazziness of it. Yeah, it has to be professionally packaged, but that's the power. We can actually transform or help people take action and transform their lives, transform organizations. We're in a perfect spot to do that.
Do you think AI will ever be in a position to do something like you do?
I hope not, but
can't do it. You can't do it.
But so far, I have looked and I have searched across, and I keep constantly searching for it. What it doesn't yet come to is there are some doodling package that AI has helped, but it doesn't really communicate the way I want to communicate it. So when I say draw a toaster, it'll draw a toaster in abstraction. When I say draw a person, it'll draw a person. But when I say, how does this person use the toaster, it's lost. This is where we make the connections. The human makes the connections and say, this is connected to this. This is exactly like I think you've used ChatGPT. You have to ask you're one of the first people I know from the EA or analyst group who has done that. So we have to ask the right questions. If we don't ask the right questions, it can give us arbitrary answers. How do you know to ask the right questions? That comes from our experience as analysts and enterprise architects who look holistically. We don't look at silos. In fact, we look to bridge silos, and that's where we can ask ChatGPT do this and ChatGPT do this, and now you, ChatGPT, combine the two to give me something.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I can relate, Dr. Raj, 100% with what you're saying, and I'm always saying that communication is what sets human apart from AI. A good analyst or a good architect should have a good communication, regardless AI or not. But getting to this point, and as we wrap up our conversation, this fruitful conversation, which I already having the pleasure to have you today, do you think we have two people or two types of people? Some think that AI will kill the human imagination because it will take over humans and everything related to the normal tasks within the organization, whether it's a process-oriented part within the operation and so on and so forth. And some people think that AI can bring some opportunities and harness a lot of new opportunities to rethink their products, even their whole business model. So from your perspective, will AI kill the human imagination, or it will fuel the creativity and innovation across the teams and the functions within the organization?
Yeah, I think it'll be the latter. And I'll tell you why. And it comes from my experiences from the technology side. So I'll explain a little bit about the technology side so we are all on the same page. Up to now, when we wrote software, we had to understand the logic of that software and we had to code it in there. We had to write if-then statements, in some sense, either simple or complex, but essentially we're giving a set of rules and saying, if this is the case, that's the case. If this is the case, that's the case. So in other words, we understood the transformation model. We understood that if this is the data, this is the output you're going to get. If you go do a credit check, Here are the things that we need to check for from a person. And therefore we say, yes, we give this person a loan. We don't give this person a loan. It's very obvious. If you read the code, you can figure it out. But now we have an environment and we have a tool and a technology that can do arbitrary transformations. In other words, we don't necessarily need to understand the logic in between. If we give a bunch of inputs and we say this inputs relate to these outputs, internally now the machine can create a model that can automatically do this transformation, which is the essential foundation of neural networks. And since these neural networks are many nodes and many layers, it is impossible, almost impossible for us humans to codify that transformation into code, because we can't write. It's like writing a million lines of code, and even then we'll be wrong because we don't really understand the model, and therefore we can't write it in software. So this has given us a new way to think about possibilities. So when we say this is a new way to think about new possibilities, now I can run through I could come up as a human, I could come up with this intuition or idea and then say, let's use AI to now quickly test this. Because AI now gives us the ability to create the user interfaces and systems quickly, short turnaround time. In fact, they even create the UIs and so on, right? And it does simulations. We can also have it run multiple simulations to shorten the time to which we answer yes or no, and we can figure out, is this idea worth pursuing, not pursuing? So we as humans now can use this technology to now test many hypotheses. But AI itself will not be able to come up with these hypotheses because they don't know the world knowledge to be able to now pick and choose which ones may or may not be related. So they're very good at, if we want to do gene sequencing, right? They're very good at gene sequencing, and we are learning about a lot of those things to say, yep, if I give a set of inputs, I can figure out that the AI can come up with possible options and patterns. But it won't say, for example, if there is a person eating potatoes all the time and there is another person who's riding a bicycle all the time, these are two totally unconnected thoughts that AI won't be able to put together. I'm just giving a random example. I don't know if it's true or not. But they won't be able to put those together because the AI does not have a world model in the brain like we do. We have a model of the world. We know how the world works. Maybe your version is different from my version, but for 80% it's common. We know certain things. We take for granted gravity. You drop a ball, it'll fall down. We take certain things for granted. But AI doesn't know that. It doesn't, because we're feeding it certain contextual situations, and it's able to innovate within that context. But human innovation is much beyond that small silo, right? Human innovation is still, again, coming to the connecting pieces. We are good at connecting different things together, totally different things together, that we can still use AI to test our hypotheses in different areas. And then we're the ones who will still assemble the solutions, if you will. We're moving away from developing the solutions to maybe assembling it. And who's going to assemble that? Some of it is technology. Some of it is non-technical. And that's where I think humans have to come together, the technical and the non-technical, and say, hey, this is how you put this together.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Raj, for this fruitful answer.
You were talking about how AI would make us more creative and on the technical side of things pretty much, but I think also you cannot be a good technical person for the most part if you don't understand the business you're trying to solve problems for. But I can see that somebody who has a creative mind to start with will probably use AI to iterate very quickly about all sorts of ideas and figure out the right idea to keep seeding and growing. Whereas before AI, you could spend months on each idea. Now you can do the same thing in a day or two and move on to the next one if it doesn't pan out. But I agree with you on that. I think people that have creativity will get much more creative with AI. And I hope so, at least.
Omar, any closing remarks?
First of all, thanks so much, Dr. Raj. It's really a pleasure to meet you today. I'm a big fan of you. And I would say that fortunately, we as human beings, we still have the communication factor that we can leverage on to communicate between different, whether AI systems in the future and humans, and within all these complex environments, let's say. So thank you again for that. And I really enjoyed the discussion today.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So in closing, Dr. Raj Ramesh, Thank you very much for your insight, for your time. Really appreciate your time and putting in the effort to share.
Thank you.